Good afternoon, good morning, good late afternoon to some of you joining us overseas. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council. Welcome to today's In-Service podcast series event. This podcast will be 30 minutes in length, and we're talking about a critical topic, fixing the last mile of frontline digital transformation. And we've got a triumvirate here, but the star of the show here is Mr. Justin Lake. He's the CEO and co-founder of Skyllful. He is our latest appointee to our technology advisory board, and this has been a relationship that's been growing both personally between Justin and myself, and organizationally. And I got to tell you, you're in for a treat today. His experience, his knowledge, his background, and some of the key takeaways he's going to be landing with inside today's discussion will be really timely for those organizations that have just gone and seen technology evolution happen at a blistering pace. And along that journey have seen technical debt rise to exorbitant amounts, right? According to McKinsey, the average company maintains technical debt ranging from 20 to 40% of its total technology estate. And further, companies spend an estimated 15 to 60% of their IT budget on the creation of new technical debt. Why are we innovating, continuously innovating, when we haven't made use of what we have already? So lots of opportunities here to not only fix what is broken and currently inside the organization, but have a pathway moving forward where we can do things better in terms of making use of all these advancements and creating this connection between human and technical roadmaps. I'm joined by my colleague, Gerardo Pelayo. He's going to be reacting to the discussion. Hello, Gerardo. And he's also going to be framing out some of the data, double-clicking some of the data that we didn't bring to light from the Voice of the Field Service Engineer Survey. For those that are joining us on LinkedIn Live, we see you. Thank you. And please bring your comments, questions, reactions. We'll try to fit them into today's discussion. Without further ado, Justin, I know you did a quick intro to yourself already, but love to allow you to do the same and introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Gerardo. Honored to be a part of this today. My name is Justin Lake, CEO and co-founder of Skyllful. Spent most of my career before Skyllful helping large companies implement technology for their frontline, mostly mobile workforces, and really enjoyed that. I worked in a variety of places, from wireless carriers to the hardware manufacturers to service providers. And across that journey, I saw that these companies were investing a lot of time in the front end, choosing hardware, choosing software, choosing their MDM provider, which services provider they were going to use. And the part that got the least attention was how we were going to make sure that the humans actually used the technology that we were rolling out. And what we really found is that there was a lack of tooling and process in place to support that. And so a few years back, we built Skyllful as a way to close that gap and really make sure that these companies have the right tooling in place, have a framework for how to make sure that their technology implementations can be successful all the way out to the front lines. So that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Well, let's get into it. So, the frontline, there's been this element here, that we've been talking to members and hearing this sort of adversarial relationship that's growing between frontline and technology, and between, quite honestly, frontline and leadership, right? In terms of, not having this lack of a voice in the innovations that are happening, and feeling like the new technologies that are being rolled out are, the new flavor of the month, and, they've got to check compliance boxes with management. What I'd like to start with, we're going to get into that stuff, but what I'd like to start with is the good, bad, and ugly of the front line. So, what are some of the hardships that you're seeing? What are some of the rewards that you're seeing from the front line in terms of, the good, bad, and ugly of what they encounter in the day-to-day, and potential solving some of those critical issues or opportunities?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is actually not about the technology. It's about communication and change management. And we did our own research on this. You guys have done a far more extensive version, but of very similar research, and found that overwhelmingly frontline employees are actually very open-minded to new technology innovation that ends up in their hands. That's a positive for all of us who are in the space and trying to leverage technology to innovate out to the edge of our workforce. That's the good news. The bad news is, historically, we've done a horrible job of communicating to them about the things that matter to them. Why are we doing this? What's in it for them? What are the potential impacts to them? let's face it, a lot of these folks who haven't been a part of the planning conversation for the previous year or 2 years leading up to the deployment of this technology fear that the technology is going to replace some or all of their role. Yeah. And when we do a less than stellar job of communicating with them, we actually exacerbate that bad feeling rather than help resolve it. And then we wonder why the adoption curve is poor when we actually roll it out. And so I think, the tech is what the tech's going to be. We're going to continue to have challenges with implementations and database integration and all of that kind of stuff. Those things are going to continue to exist. But by and large, that's not where I see the problems with tech innovation. I see it breaking down to communication and education, how we make them understand why and how we make them understand how to do the things that they need to do.
Absolutely. And, when we're talking and leveraging the voice of the frontline research data that we've done, the voice of the field service engineer, as well as the voice of the contact center agent, which are 2 surveys that the Service Council does annually, we continue to hear about the rise in complexity of what they're encountering because of, the breadth of product that, now the single technician or engineer or contact center agent has to be aware of in order to be effective in front of the customer in that moment of truth. We're hearing a big rise in terms of the pressure from management and customers in terms of being quicker and, more expedient in your delivery. Gerardo, I'd love to bring you into the discussion, maybe double click on some of those trends exiting from those 2 exercises behind some of Justin's comments.
Yes, indeed. And the first piece, I would agree that the higher complexity and the technology that comes with that is not a showstopper, but it is part of the important context that we have to work with and acknowledge. We hear this greater technology, greater technology knowledge that is needed, greater knowledge about the product itself because the install base is more complex. 83% of the field service technicians that responded to the survey agree that this has gotten harder to manage since they started in the profession. The expectations from both management and customers, 77% agree. So by and large, there's this recognition that the landscape has changed. The problem is the gap that exists between those expectations and the complexity and the pace of the resources as perceived by the frontline. Data entry becoming less time consuming, only 48% agree. The processes being more clear and the training that goes with that, less than 2/3 of the data. So bringing the frontline on board with these challenges by providing the right resources is definitely a pending assignment. And you brought up the fear of this technology, and the research supports actually your claim. 1 in 5 technicians say that they feel at risk of losing their job to technology. There's an additional 22% that say they're not clear of what role technology is going to play. And this second group could be even more complex because that seeds doubt, that gets in the way of a career advancement and a true focus on delivering the customer experience, adopting, providing feedback on all of these tools. So I really like seeing technology not as the enemy, but as part of the context that we have to manage, and that if we manage it effectively, we can actually take advantage of it.
Yeah. And moving into the challenges, an equivalent, 1 in 5, almost 19% cited technology interface and tools change too frequently as the least favorite part of their day. And we attribute this to, the source of frustration and dislike to 2 things. One being technical debt. We talked about that. It's going through the roof and it continues to. And I do think that a big source of technical debt is the lack of clarity on value from existing platforms and the lack of clarity on new rollout. And I think that's like the critical thing. But the other area is the voice of the frontline is still not heard. It's still not welcome into the discussion. 31% didn't state that they agree that their company is interested in collecting their feedback. And even worse, 39% didn't feel like that management was considering their voice for improvements. And nearly 3 out of 10 didn't feel like they have a role in innovation at their company. So Justin, back to you. I'd love to hear your viewpoints on what you're hearing from customers in the broader field service community in terms of the challenges that remain around some of these fringes, if you will.
Yeah, I want to address the last thing you just talked about with the communication, because I think I've discovered maybe something that should have been obvious more often, but it's human nature that in the absence of communication, we tend to think the worst. We assume the worst. And so when we don't communicate out to the front lines well about what's coming and why it's coming and how it's going to impact them and all the things that we talked about at the top of this conversation, then their default state is to assume the worst. And so that means when we actually get to the implementation phase of this process, we're working from a negative position instead of just from zero. We're actually working from negative, and we got to build up back to the credibility point, and then we have to try to move forward with that. And so we're constantly working out of a hole. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement on that. And that shouldn't actually cost a ton of money. It just needs to be something that's more proactive. The other thing you talked about, John, and I agree with this completely, it's kind of fascinating to me about how we look at technology adoption, in that most deployments of technology are set up through IT. The structure in most of the companies that are probably listening today are set up in a very project mentality, right? So there's a start, there's an end, there are timelines, deadlines, budget, and all of that kind of stuff. And so the training and implementation for the technology is treated like a project. What I think is that digital readiness, preparing the workforce for the technology, needs to be a capability that persists over time. It's not just a one and done thing. So these leaders in many of these companies are excited about all the tech change that they're bringing to the field. And these are the things that they rightly want to brag about, both to their leadership, to their customers, and to the market, about all the innovation that they're bringing to the table. But the frontline workers on many times are on the receiving end of all of that change, and they're ill prepared for that. So I advocate for really looking at digital readiness as a capability, not just a one and done thing that you assign to a project, but a thought process about how you think about change management and how you think about ensuring that your technology investments are going to be protected and you're going to actually get the ROI that you expect.
I love that. That's actually exactly on par with where we were taking the conversation next around, change management. And we did a previous podcast around change management here. And it was called The Architect of Change, and the importance for the leader, the operational leader, to be present for both the teardown and the rebuild, right? To go through the good, bad, and indifferent along that pathway. And there were some other things that we had in there, some steps in terms of effective change management, such as involving A players, communication, making it not a stop and start, but a continuum, right? So you're actually hitting upon that digital readiness thread that I think we all agree in. And some of those traditional change management approaches are falling short right now. And so whether it be Pro-C or Lean Six Sigma or whatever the passion where that takes you in terms of the approach you take. So I'm curious, why are they falling short? Is it really built around that stop and start project-based orientation? Is there something further to this?
I have strong opinions on this. I don't think the frameworks are the problem. I think that the attention that is paid to the women and men on the front lines in the context of those frameworks is the problem. So if you look at Pro-C and you look at their ADKAR methodology, it's about awareness and desire and knowledge. We do nothing. In most cases that I've witnessed, we do very little to deal with awareness, and we do even less to deal with desire. What's in it for them? How is their day going to be impacted by this? In the best of scenarios, which still happens too infrequently, we jump right to knowledge. This is how you do this thing. But if we haven't addressed the awareness and the desire phases of that, then we don't stand a chance of that knowledge portion being effective. And listen, I am not a change management professional, but I have now spent enough time around very experienced, very talented change management professionals who I hold in very high regard. And when they explain these processes to me, and then I look at the organizations that I've been exposed to, and I see that these things are not trickling down to the field adequately. We're having those conversations as if everybody works in the conference room that we're having the conversation in. But most of the people that are impacted don't work in those conference rooms or cubicles. They actually work out in the field. where their circumstances are very different. So I don't believe it's a problem with the frameworks. I believe it's how we're applying those frameworks and understanding that there is some uniqueness about the roles that they fulfill out in the field. They're standing in front of customers. They're standing in front of machines. They're out in the elements. They're working with tools in the physical world. And we can't treat them the same way or communicate with them the same way that we would our colleagues in more traditional knowledge worker roles.
Gerardo, I'm curious your viewpoints. Yeah, welcome you back.
Yes, because I'd like to emphasize one of the things that you said, which is engagement needs to be a two-way street. You talked about we have to listen and we have to understand what they're thinking about, give them a real voice. This is larger than technology implementations. It's part of the organizational culture. And for all we talk about it, it's with this type of use cases that we start seeing the impact. We saw it in the data as we talked about innovation. And almost 70% of the technicians said that they were motivated to innovate by their leaders. And that sounds great at first glance, because service innovation is big in service leaders' agenda. Great that these are being pushed. But when we also ask, are you getting feedback on the innovation that you provide? Do you have the right resources in order to take that innovation forward? Are you given enough time? Do you get rewarded for that innovation? The percentages start to drop significantly, less than half if we look at that funnel. And that tells us that there's a lot of push on, this is what I want you to do, and these are the technologies that I want you to adopt going forward. But there's not enough listening going on as how do we make this better? How to connect the challenges that you have to the value that the tool can deliver. And very much like the change management frameworks that John was outlining, I believe that is also true for a lot of the technologies. It's not the technology or the optimization or the capabilities that are at fault. It is the ability to leverage those in the right context with the right training.
I want to touch on one thing, Gerardo, if I may. You mentioned this, and I just want to kind of expand on it. You mentioned the time. And I think that is one of the most overlooked things when we talk about the differences between knowledge workers spending time in the home office and how they adopt new processes and technology in their world versus those same circumstances with frontline teams. And one of the biggest differences is the time afforded for their adoption. So if we have a service technician that's expected to close out 5, 6, 8 work orders a day, the challenge is that while we're rolling out their new implementation of technology, we still expect them to close out 5, 6, 8 work orders a day. And that is a fundamental breakdown in the expectations. We can't do both. And then the leaders that are pressing on both sides of this, hey, we want to get the adoption of the technology, but we also need to keep the business running at the same time, feel frustrated that they're not doing either of those things particularly well. So when we talk about the capability of digital readiness, it needs to be something that is incorporated into the flow of the business so that we can keep the activities going. These are task-oriented folks inside the business. They are measured by very specific metrics on deliveries and sales and work order, tasks closed out and things like that. So we have to think about digital readiness in the context of their role so that they can both perform at work and begin to adopt, and leverage the new technologies.
Justin, you agreed to great points, by the way. You agreed to thinking on your toes and taking some questions inbound from our community. And I think we've got a good one here.
Let's do it.
Thank you, Fayez. So we've got, how does one break the inertia among subcontractors to adopt technology? I love this question because, as we think about manufacturers, there's a common extended labor network because of the talent shortage, and extended third-party labor networks are becoming more and more popular and common. So do you have any thoughts on that first question and maybe the subcontext behind it?
I do. What we found, and I won't make this a commercial about Skyllful, but what we found in our business is that most of the learning tools and methodologies that the companies that we serve have in place are primarily aimed at their internal employee workforce. And so when contractors come up, we have the same expectations of their adoption of our processes and technology, but all of the learning tooling that we have in place is really designed just for our internal folks. So I'm not surprised to see this question. And so you have to enable that and build that digital readiness capability out to all of the stakeholders and anticipate that they are going to need probably more handholding and support through that process than even your internal folks. And in most cases that at least I've seen, I don't have data to support this, but just anecdotally, it seems that the contractor population actually rotates. You have more attrition in the contractor side of things. So the onboarding process, this actually needs to be like a fundamental capability. Your technology is as important as your ability to do the manual work, right? Because as we've often said before, if you do the manual work, but it doesn't end up in the systems, it may well not have been done, right? May as well not have been done. So you have to build this capability all the way out to the field and to that contract workforce as well. So I'll leave it there.
All right, good, because that's actually a great segue. Go ahead, Gerardo, if you have some additional points.
Yeah, just one very quick thing. You mentioned before the what's in it for me when looking at our own teams. The same happens for the contractors, and a data point that tells us that it's not just a perception, it's a real problem, is that less than 6 in 10 of the frontline agents, both field service technicians and remote support, feel that the KPIs that they're being measured on align with the value that they're providing. So if that's happening internally, now let's take that picture outside and say, are we truly aligning the performance metrics of our contractors, the incentives that we have, the resources that we're providing to them, to the expectations that we're setting for them when we want them to adopt our technology and processes? I think that is one key element to supplement your points.
I'm sorry I have to keep doing this, but I want to add one additional thing here before we close out this topic. You raise another really interesting point about the metrics by which or through which these folks are being measured. It's obvious when I say this out loud that the physical activities that service engineers and technicians in the field conduct, they are getting done most often from what I've seen. The physical work, the hard work is actually getting done. That work doesn't become data until somebody enters it into the enterprise system and does so accurately. And this is one of the breakdowns that I see happening every single day, is that the men and women on the front lines are doing the hard work. They're doing the things that need to get done. They're servicing the customers. But until they make that work turn into data, which means they transact in their enterprise systems accurately, on time, in the right process, in compliance with that business process, then it doesn't turn into data. And so we're measuring them based on the data because we don't have eyes and ears to look over their shoulder and see all the work that's happening. We need them to transact in the systems in order for us to evaluate the physical work that happened when it becomes data. And so it's such an interesting, to me, it's interesting point that it's that intersection between the physical world and the digital world where things tend to break down a little bit. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure that the men and women in the field are transacting in the systems accurately and consistently, independently of needing any help from anyone else, so that then at least we have a good baseline of accurate data through which they can be measured. And that actually serves to help them more than hurt them in most cases.
So what I just heard is what's being reported might not be reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
We see it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually is a great segue into this next conversation around process clarity and the infusion of AI and everything that's upon us right now. So 79% of field service engineers agree that the work that they're doing requires greater technology knowledge when they started in the profession. So they agree that it's getting more challenging. And only 54% say that process clarity has improved during that period. So, with the advent of AI, can we close the gap in terms of creating greater process clarity, maybe even in case summary and things to that effect, to realize that true value from digital transformation and all the things that we're talking about? Why don't we start there? And I might have a follow-up.
I think we can. I think we need to start with the basics. And it goes back to, again, how we started this conversation with the communication. I saw just this week a circumstance where a new AI-enabled tool was being pushed out in a kind of proof of concept out to some frontline teams. And on the surface, it seems like a really simple data capture application of taking a photograph for a merchandising use case. But there was some complexity in the application in terms of how to capture the photograph of of the shelf space accurately and things like that. And further, there was no communication about why this was important and how it was going to save them time in the long run. And I think that the wave of AI that is upon us right now, it is not going to slow down. And I don't want it to slow down. I'm very excited about this. I think there's tremendous upside to the advancement of AI, especially as it relates to the frontline teams. But the role for us as leaders is getting more important for us to communicate, not less important because of AI. And I think that's one of the potential risks that I see is I feel that there's a little bit of perception that AI is like this magic wand thing that we're going to wave over the business and we're going to sprinkle a little AI dust onto our operations and think that things are going to get better. And I posit that things are likely to get worse more than better if we don't communicate well. And we have evidence that we haven't been doing this particularly well through the last phase of digital transformation, right? So we need to acknowledge that. We need to decide going forward that the innovation of today and tomorrow is actually going to be more difficult from a change management standpoint. And we need to be better about how we handle that.
And the book is being rewritten, right? Process is changing. Technology's impact on, subordination of process and tasks and things to that effect. It's rewriting everything. So even those elder statesmen and women that have been here for decades doing their thing and know their business cold, there's a new process here that needs to be thought of and considered as part of the change management for future generation. Yeah. Gerardo, I know you have a viewpoint on this. We've butted heads internally on this one a bunch.
Yes, and one thing I would mention is process clarity. Some might say, well, what does that actually mean? And there's three elements that we see are the main use cases. The process is changing too quickly, so it's too sudden a change.
Yeah.
Second one, the process is changing too often, which then you lose stability. You get frustrated because of what you learned now has changed again, and probably by somebody who doesn't understand your day-to-day. And the third, very interesting to me, is that the processes are becoming too restrictive and get in the way of people doing their job. Again, there might be a gap between reality and perception, but perception becomes reality when you're getting into adoption. So the question that I would have for you is, as organizations need to figure out on which of these three boxes they have more of a pain point, and that we all here agree that this needs to be viewed as a process, as a journey. Do you see that changing as you go out into the industry? Do you see a higher acknowledgement that technology adoption is a process and not just a one-off decision?
Yes, I see it, but I see it in all the wrong places. So I see a continued, emphasis on the importance of technology adoption, digital adoption amongst knowledge workers on desktop applications. And I think I don't need to tell you guys that the majority of the workforce doesn't work on desktop applications. They don't work at a desk. They are deskless employees by nature, especially with this audience. And so I think there's an increase in awareness, but in all the wrong places. I think we're not paying attention to the uniqueness of the challenges of the men and women in the field. And I think AI stands to actually create more disruption because of some of the things that we talked about in the beginning of this conversation. I think the amazing opportunity for the business leaders and the people that are in their organizations is that AI will enable them to spend more time doing the things that only humans can do. That's actually a great opportunity for all of us. It takes the mundane processes away from people so that we can focus on the things that only humans can do. That is a great opportunity. But in the absence of adequate communication about that, the humans are going to be left to think of the worst case scenario. Some version of the bots are going to take over my job, right? Yeah. And so it's up to us as the leaders who are bringing this technology out to those frontline teams to make sure that we are communicating that well so that they can not fear it, but they can embrace it, and we can all get what we need out of this innovation going forward.
It was someone that said the brain fires from the same place as mistrust with the lack of clarity. Right.
Yes.
So we could keep going, man. We're going to have to do a follow up on this one. So Justin, this has been a great discussion, but for our listening audience, maybe you could allow them to get to know you a little bit better. First of all, you're a new appointee to our technology advisory board. A very warm welcome to you. We are better with you. So thank you. Love to understand the value that you expect to receive out of that. And then behind that, maybe something personal about yourself that you're looking forward to, or something personal along the side besides what you do here at Skyllful.
Well, both of my answers will have something in common. I have just an endless curiosity and a desire to learn. I was a horrible student through traditional academia. I literally failed out of college my first attempt at that. So I'm not a traditional academic. I didn't end up in the role that I did through success in academia. Yet I'm extremely curious and love to learn. And so my participation in Service Council is really about learning, about seeing things behind the scenes to understand how things really work. I want to understand the problems that the service market are solving. And, from a business perspective, see how we can leverage the tools that we have today to help with that, and see where we need to deploy our roadmap, going forward, so that we can continue to stay aligned with those challenges. On the more personal front, very similarly, something that's just a goofy thing that I've gotten into is 3D modeling and printing. So my son actually took an engineering class in high school and said, "Hey, I'd like to get a 3D printer." And I was like, "Oh, of course, that sounds pretty interesting to me." So we went out and bought a kit. This is going back years now, and we built that. And then I realized that in order to actually print stuff, you need a 3D model to actually print. So I taught myself how to model in 3D. And so that's just a hobby. I'm not great at it, but I enjoy it, and I enjoy learning, and I enjoy kind of pushing the envelope. So there's really not a room in our house that doesn't have some problem that was fixed through our 3D printed model in various colors of plastic. So as I'm saying this out loud, maybe this is one of those hobbies I should have kept to myself, but John, you asked me, so.
No, it's very cool.
No, I love it. I love it. We all have a little nerd in us, and that sounds like fun. So that's pretty cool.
That is.
Well, listen, he's Justin Lake. Thank you for joining today's podcast. This is going to be accessible on, all the things you get it on: Spotify, Amazon, our website, here on LinkedIn. So you can revisit this, share it with colleagues. I encourage you to do so. Lots of good nuggets shared by Justin and his experience with Skyllful and all the good work they're doing across the service community. I'd encourage you to engage with Justin and his team to learn more. And Justin can be found on all the social channels we just talked about. Justin, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a board member. And I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime.
Thank you for having me.